Have you ever wondered why, even when paying all your bills on time, it seems like there's never enough money and the feeling of being strapped for cash never goes away? That strange feeling of always rushing, always adjusting, always saying, next month will be better, even when you don't officially owe anything to anyone. Maybe the problem isn't a lack of income, or extreme disorganization, or irresponsibility. Maybe there's something much quieter happening there, something that almost no one explains to you, but that everyone feels. Many people believe they are financially secure simply because they can afford their car payments. The bill is due, the debit goes through, the bank doesn't call. On the outside, everything seems under control, but inside the reality is different. Constant exhaustion, decisions always made on the edge, anxiety before the end of the month, and that feeling that any unforeseen event could turn into a disaster. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt like you work hard, earn reasonably well, but live trapped, without room for choice, without real freedom? That's exactly where what I call invisible debt originates. It doesn't show up as a late payment on your statement, doesn't generate immediate fines, and doesn't lead to negative credit reporting. On the contrary, it disguises itself as normal. Invisible debt is the kind you pay on time, but it exacts a high price every month. It steals your peace of mind, limits your decisions, and slowly hijacks your financial future. And a car is by far one of the main gateways to this type of trap. Think about it. How many people do you know who say, "The car fits my budget. The monthly payment seems comfortable. The financing was approved. The salesperson guaranteed it was a good deal." But nobody talks about the accumulated effect of that. The car isn't just the monthly payment. It's the insurance, the registration tax, the maintenance, the depreciation, the fuel, and most importantly, it's the long-term commitment that accompanies you every month, rain or shine, whether you're doing well or poorly financially. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because often the problem isn't the amount itself, but the mental and financial space that this commitment occupies in your life. This is the most dangerous part of invisible debt. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't stop you from buying today, but it prevents you from choosing tomorrow. Little by little, you realize that you can't refuse a bad job, you can't slow down, you can't take advantage of a better opportunity because there's a fixed structure sucking up your income before you even decide what to do with it. Stay with me until the end, because understanding this mechanism completely changes how you view consumer decisions, especially when it comes to cars and financing. Perhaps, as you listen to this, a scene comes to mind. Maybe you're remembering the day you signed a contract, thinking you were being responsible, when in reality, you were just accepting something that seemed normal. And it's precisely from this feeling, this silent discomfort that almost no one names, that we need to move forward to understand where it all begins, and why so many people fall into this trap without realizing it. And perhaps that's exactly why this subject needs to be spoken aloud. Because when we start to name what we feel, we realize we're not alone. This feeling of always being on edge, even when doing everything right, isn't weakness or lack of discipline. It's something structural, experienced by many people who made decisions thinking they were normal. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. It could be a situation you've experienced, a feeling that arose while listening to this, or even a question you've never dared to ask. This space exists precisely for that purpose. When you comment, it's not just another number. It's someone saying, "I'm going through this too." And that creates a real connection between people who often feel isolated in their own financial decisions. Your experience can help someone who hasn't yet realized they're trapped in this same silent trap. And if at any point during this video, you thought this needed to have happened sooner in my life, liking the video is a simple way to show that this kind of conversation matters. That's what makes the algorithm understand that this content deserves to reach more people who are also feeling this invisible pressure. And if you feel that no one has ever explained these things to you in this way, if this more human approach to money, consumption, and choices makes sense to you, subscribing to the channel is almost like saying, "I want to continue understanding this better." This channel only grows and continues to exist because there are people on the other side who decide to walk together, learning, questioning, and reflecting on decisions that impact their entire lives. Your participation here is what keeps this message alive and reaching more people who need to hear it. Now, with that in mind, we need to take the next step. because understanding that invisible debt exists is only the beginning. The most important point is to discover exactly where it originates. At what point a seemingly harmless decision transforms into a commitment that follows you for years. And that's what we're going to explore next. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this is where many illusions begin to crumble. The car, contrary to what is often repeated, is not just a means of transportation. It has become a silent symbol of achievement, belonging, and social validation. And that is precisely why it functions as the most well-disguised financial trap that exists. Not because it's inherently bad, but because the decision rarely stems from pure reason. It almost always arises from emotion, impulse, comparison, the feeling that now I can, even when the real cost is still far from being understood. Notice how the process unfolds. The conversation never begins with the full impact, the years-long journey that contract will create. It starts with the installment, an installment that seems comfortable, adjusted, within budget. That's where the hidden truth comes into play. When you reduce a decision that's too big to a monthly number, the brain relaxes. It feels relieved. It believes. Everything is under control. But this interpretation is incomplete. Long-term financing dilutes the problem over time, but doesn't eliminate the impact. On the contrary, it silently spreads it over several years of your life. And the car doesn't just cost you the monthly payment. It costs you insurance, registration tax, maintenance, servicing, tires, fuel, unexpected expenses, and something even more expensive, mental attention and financial space. Every month, even before you decide what to do. With your money, a portion of it is already committed. This changes decisions, changes choices, changes paths. The impact doesn't appear all at once. It reveals itself gradually, behind the scenes of your routine, in the opportunity you miss, in the plan you postpone, in the feeling of always balancing accounts, even without apparent excesses. The most delicate point here is understanding that the mistake isn't in the car, nor in the buyer. The mistake lies in how the decision is presented and absorbed. It comes dressed in rationality, but loaded with emotion. I deserve it. Everyone does it. It's normal to finance. I'll get organized later. All of this sounds logical at the moment, but hides a silent transformation in your mindset. Little by little, you begin to normalize excessively long commitments, accept less room for choice, and call something that, in practice, is rigidity, stability. This is the perfect trap. Nothing seems wrong. There are no delays, no charges, no immediate crisis. There's only a constant weight shaping your financial journey without you realizing it. And when someone tries to warn you, it seems like an exaggeration. After all, the car is there, running, being used every day. But the most important question is almost never asked. What is this commitment preventing me from building while I maintain it? When you start looking at it from this angle, you realize that many consumer decisions aren't about the object itself, but about identity, belonging, and comparison. The car becomes an extension of the image you want to project, even if it costs years of financial flexibility. And it's at this point that practical education makes all the difference, because it's not about prohibiting, but about revealing what is normally hidden. Comment below what just went through your mind. Write, "This makes sense to me." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's an almost invisible moment when everything changes, and most people don't realize when it happens. It's not when the debt explodes, nor when the budget collapses. It's before. It's in that seemingly innocent moment when the wrong question is asked. Instead of, "What is the impact of this on my life?" the question becomes simply, "Does it fit within the month?" And when that switch happens, the decision has already begun to spiral out of control. Even if everything still seems organized, the scene is simple and common. You're faced with numbers, simulations, options. Your focus is drawn to the installment, the monthly payment, the feeling of relief when you realize you can afford it. The brain loves this quick response. It reduces immediate anxiety and creates an illusion of security. But behind the scenes of this decision, something important is left out: the long term. The journey that this commitment will impose isn't factored in. The accumulated, silent impact, diluted over years, remains invisible. This is how invisible debt is. Born, not as a glaring mistake, but as an adjustment too small to seem dangerous. The payment is up to date, the contract was signed with confidence, The current income sustains the commitment, but the healthy limit has already been exceeded without fanfare. And when this happens, the transformation is subtle. Money ceases to be a tool of choice and becomes a pre-allocated resource. Before you decide, it already has a destination. If you observe carefully, the mistake happens in slow motion. First comes the comparison with other people. Then the rational justification. It's normal. Everyone does it. I'll make up for it later. Next, the acceptance of a longer payment period to alleviate the burden. Each step seems small, but the whole thing creates an excessively long bond with a cost that doesn't fully materialize. The hidden truth is that paying on time doesn't mean paying cheaply. It only means keeping the system running while it consumes your flexibility. The most curious thing is that nothing goes wrong immediately. The routine continues. The car delivers what it promises. Life goes on. But little by little, the decisions begin to dwindle. The risk becomes more frightening. The margin disappears. Freedom becomes a theory. It is at this point that many people feel a weight that is difficult to explain. It's not a lack of money. It's a lack of space. Space to make mistakes, to change, to grow. And this space was gradually given away at the very moment when the right question wasn't asked. When you see this, you understand that invisible debt doesn't stem from a lack of control, but from normalization. It arises when the short term wins over the long term, when immediate comfort silences the future impact. And recognizing this moment changes everything, because from then on, decisions cease to be automatic and become conscious. There's still much more behind this critical point, and that's where the revelations become clearer. As the conversation progresses, comment below, I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this is exactly where things really start to change. When the 4-20-10 rule comes into play, it doesn't appear as a cold prohibition or a break on your dreams. It acts as a silent filter, almost a guardian, preventing an emotional decision from disguising itself as a rational one. And this detail changes everything. The rule doesn't try to convince you not to own a car, nor to live in scarcity. It simply asks a better question before you sign anything. Think of it as a new lens. Instead of just looking at the installment, you start to see the entire impact. The minimum down payment forces you to reduce the immediate impulse and gain time to think. The time limit prevents the problem from being pushed so far that it seems harmless, and the income commitment ceiling protects something that almost no one protects: your margin of choice. This combination creates a simple but powerful barrier between you and invisible debt. Not because it eliminates risk, but because it reveals the hidden truth before it's too late. The most interesting thing is understanding what happens when someone applies this rule for the first time. Many options simply cease to make sense. What once seemed accessible begins to feel burdensome. Not because the money disappeared, but because clarity arrived. And that's a mindset shift. The decision stops being guided by immediate relief and starts being guided by the impact on the entire journey. You begin to understand that financial freedom doesn't come from installments that fit today, but from commitments that won't restrict you tomorrow. The 4-20-10 rule cuts invisible debt before it even exists because it forces the future to sit at the decision-making table. It brings to the present questions that normally only appear years later, when the damage is already done. How will this affect my choices? How much space does this take up in my life? What am I missing out on while maintaining this commitment? These questions are not pessimistic, they are honest. And financial honesty is rare in a market that thrives on making the present easier and hiding the future. And here's an important point. Following this rule doesn't mean abandoning dreams. It means preventing a dream from becoming a prison. Many people confuse desire with urgency. The rule separates these two things. It shows that wanting something doesn't require sacrificing your tranquility, your flexibility, and your peace of mind for years. On the contrary, it creates a more solid foundation so that future decisions are made with more awareness, less anxiety, and much more control. When you look at it from this angle, you realize that the rule doesn't take away possibilities. It gives back power. The power to choose, the power to refuse, the power to wait. And this completely changes the relationship with consumption, with status, and with the very idea of success. There are still important nuances behind this filter. Revelations that help to understand why it works so well, even though it's simple. And that's precisely where the conversation begins to gain even more depth. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when you start avoiding invisible debt, the change doesn't just happen in your wallet. It happens in the way you live. The difference between those who ignore this kind of care and those who begin to respect this filter is almost physical. On one hand, there's the constant feeling of being on the edge, always adjusting, always calculating, always hoping nothing goes off script. On the other hand, something rare these days emerges: margin. And margin changes everything. Those who ignore the rule often live in a kind of silent tension. Decisions become more difficult. The horizon shrinks. Any unforeseen event becomes a threat. Any opportunity a risk. Not because the person is irresponsible, but because their space has been gradually consumed by commitments that seemed normal. Life goes on, but always with the handbrake on. Those who avoid this invisible debt, however, begin to experience a more subtle and powerful transformation. Money ceases to be merely something that comes in and goes out, and becomes a tool for choice. This change appears in the details of everyday life, in the peace of mind of not depending on every penny of your next paycheck, in the ability to say no without fear, in the clarity to make decisions more calmly. Avoiding invisible debt isn't about living with less, it's about living with more control. It's about exchanging haste for awareness, anxiety for strategy. Little by little, you realize that financial peace doesn't come from earning more immediately, but from not compromising the future without realizing it. There's also an important shift in mindset. When you understand that you don't need to prove anything to anyone through consumption, comparison loses its power. The car ceases to be a status symbol and becomes simply a functional choice within a larger journey. This brings lightness. It brings autonomy. It brings the feeling that you are in control and not reacting to external pressures all the time. And this feeling spreads to other areas of life, influencing decisions that go far beyond financing. The most interesting thing is that at no point does this sound like deprivation. On the contrary, avoiding invisible debt is an act of strategic intelligence. It's choosing not to trade years of freedom for minutes of validation. It's understanding that true comfort isn't in manageable installments, but in peaceful nights and open possibilities. When this realization hits you, you start to see other similar traps, hidden in choices that seem harmless, but carry profound impacts behind the scenes of your financial life. And it is precisely at this point that the journey becomes clearer, because the car is just one of the entry points. There are other commitments, other habits, other decisions that follow the same silent pattern. Recognizing this broadens your perspective and prepares the ground for more conscious choices going forward. Comment below, I'm on this journey too. If you've made it this far, it's because this conversation has truly resonated with you. And when we can look at money, decisions, and choices with more clarity, everything starts to make more sense. If this type of content helps you see what's usually hidden behind the scenes of financial decisions, subscribing to the channel is a simple way to continue this exchange. The idea here is to continue deepening these conversations, always in a direct, human, and applicable way to real life. If you'd like, leave a comment saying you watched it to the end. You can write something like, "This message was for me." This helps create a sense of community among people who are trying to make better choices with more awareness and less pressure. And if at any point in this video you felt the conversation flowed, that it made sense, leaving a like is a natural way to show that and help this content reach more people who also need this kind of reflection. And if you want to continue along these lines, there's a video over here that complements this topic exactly. Click there and continue watching.